and what he says about the Strait of Hormuz.
They're pretty close to signing a paper. We've actually gotten along with them very well.
And the president says the anti-weaponization fund was a beautiful thing. Could Congress continue the mission of the fund? We'll hear from Congressman James Comer. And in California's closely watched jungle primaries, Republican Steve Hilton currently has a slight lead in the governor's race, and how the LA mayoral race is now shaping up.
Even the Democrats accept that the state cannot go on like this, with the highest housing costs in the country, the highest gas prices, the highest taxes for the worst results.
This is Capitol Report, live from our global headquarters in our nation's capital. Here's Steve Lance.
Good evening. President Trump saying that ongoing talks with Iran are going very well, and that if a deal does happen, it'll be over the weekend. NTD's White House correspondent Mario Tzu has the latest from the North Lawn.
They're pretty close to signing a paper. We've actually gotten along with them very well. And you know what you saw for the last few nights? It takes two to tango. You understand that. We hit them very hard on something else unrelated. And so they were responding. I mean, if it happens, and it might not happen, you know, who knows? But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
President Trump declaring that no boots on the ground will be needed in Iran, citing the military successes of Operations Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury. That's as he announces that the Iranian regime has agreed to no nuclear weapon.
I can tell you this. We defined victory as destroying their defense industrial base, significantly reducing the number of missile launchers that they possess, significantly reducing their stockpile of drones, and we achieved all of those, in addition to destroying what they had left of an air force and wiping out their entire conventional navy. Those are all gone. So I consider that victory, and we did too, and that was the purpose of Epic Fury.
And as President Trump continues to weigh whether the U.S. will resume its strikes inside Iran, the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports is holding strong, with Central Command announcing that 125 commercial vessels have now been redirected from either entering or exiting Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. The president saying that the U.S. has been clearing mines in the strait in anticipation of its opening when a deal is signed.
The Hormuz Strait will open immediately upon signing. Now, that's subject to a couple of areas being cleaned out also of mines, which we don't think there are any. So it'll happen very quickly, and we'll take the southern route anyway. But immediately upon signing, we open up the Hormuz Strait.
Meanwhile, just about a month ahead of America's 250th birthday, President Trump is highlighting various construction and beautification projects that he spearheaded throughout the Capitol, including fixing 28 fountains in D.C., personally contributing to renovating Lafayette Park in front of the White House, which had been in terrible condition and used as a protest site, and notably completing the final coat of protection on the Lincoln Reflecting Pool, writing, quote, "This will be the first time since the day it was built in 1922 that it has worked, and worked wonderfully indeed."
And you can have something you can be very proud of, and it'll last for 50 to 100 years before you have to do anything with it. Very strong, powerful substance that we use. And we picked a color called American Flag Blue. So it's going to be really special. I thought you'd like to see it.
This new announcement coming as President Trump has tied in his beautification efforts with matters of national security, his third assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, renewing a push for a secure event space found in the White House ballroom. Reporting from the White House, Mario Tzu, NTD News.
And in the Oval Office today, President Trump was asked about the anti-weaponization fund proposed by the Justice Department. This comes after a federal judge ordered the program to be suspended. Here's what the president said.
Weaponization fund, as far as I'm concerned, was a beautiful thing. What happened to great people, great American people, the way they were victimized, the way they were savaged. You have suicides, they killed themselves, they went bankrupt, they were put in jail for long periods of time, they were accused of things that never happened, they had prosecutors that were radical lunatics, and their lives were destroyed.
The fund was created as part of a lawsuit President Trump filed against the IRS. The settlement calls for the federal government to pay out roughly $1.8 billion to victims of the weaponization. Speaking on the latest ruling, the president says, quote, "We'll see how it all works out." In the meantime, members of Congress are looking for ways to compensate victims of the government's abuse of power and fight fraud of government programs. Joining me now to discuss is Congressman James Comer from Kentucky, chair of the House Oversight Committee. Chairman Comer, thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure.
Chairman Comer, the Department of Justice says that it will not be proceeding with that anti-weaponization fund to compensate victims of political persecution. Is there still a need to address and make whole and amends for weaponization of justice, particularly under the previous administration? We saw the January 6th committee play out during that time as well up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, well, let's just be very clear. The Democrats and the Biden administration weaponized the Department of Justice, and there were a lot of people who were victimized by that and probably deserve compensation for that. They were out legal fees, their reputations were tarnished. So I do believe there's something that that the government should do to make up for the abuse of power in the previous administration and by the January 6th committee and all the other entities in Washington that were weaponized against conservatives. But having said that, I don't think the way the weaponization fund was born and the lack of specifics and guardrails as to how the $1.8 billion was going to be administered was palatable to very many members of Congress. So hopefully, we can talk about this and try to come up with a plan that would have bipartisan support. Because I don't want to give the next Democrat president, whether if it's Gavin Newsom or whomever, $1.8 billion to hand out. I mean, he can't even manage his state's Medicaid programs. I don't want to see taxpayer dollars used for things like that. So I do agree there was a weaponized government and people deserve compensation, but hopefully we can come up with a better way and have a transparent process as to how that will be doled out.
Now, your colleague over in the Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, he's proposing that Congress create its own anti-weaponization fund and vet claims with the Federal Tort Claims Act. That's an existing legal process and framework for claims against the federal government. Is that perhaps an approach worth pursuing?
It's worth looking into. There are judgment funds that the government has. I know there's a judgment fund that some of my constituents are, trying to participate in, where the Army Corps of Engineers made the decision to flood the Mississippi River on a bunch of prime farmland, just to try to control the river level as it was headed downstream. And there was a lot of damage to those farmers, with topsoil being washed away. That's a judgment fund. That's what things like that are for. That was a decision made by the government, and it adversely affected citizens. So there are judgment funds out there, but there's never been anything pertaining to weaponization, because I don't think we've ever seen a government weaponized like we saw during the Merrick Garland days.
Now, your committee, the House Oversight Committee, has been making some progress in combating fraud. That's something the Trump administration is also prioritizing. What initiatives do you think will have the most lasting impact?
I think Medicaid. What we're finding is the Medicaid fraud is rampant. What you saw in Minnesota with the Medicaid and welfare fraud, what we've seen in California with the hospice fraud. Now we're moving into Ohio. We're having a hearing as we speak, talking about the Medicaid fraud in Ohio. I think from there we'll go to New York, probably my home state of Kentucky. Something has to be done about fraud. And what's happening, and the reason I think there's so much Medicaid fraud, is because Medicaid is primarily federal dollars, but it's sent to the states, and the states administer it. So the states aren't as concerned about federal dollars as they are state dollars, because in a lot of Democrat governors' eyes and some Republican governors' eyes, well, this is federal money. This is like manna from heaven. This doesn't cost us anything. So they don't have the will to go after the fraudsters. And what we're seeing now, because of our efforts and the efforts of Vice President Vance with his fraud task force of identifying this fraud, we're having more people come forward, more whistleblowers come forward and blow the whistle on more fraud. And hopefully we can see some people convicted. I know we've gotten hundreds of people removed from being providers for Medicaid because they were billing Medicaid for services that weren't being provided. They weren't even real Medicaid providers, but they were Medicaid. They were getting paid by Medicaid. So we are already seeing a substantial amount of progress with respect to getting the backs of the taxpayers and eliminating these fraudsters from continuing to get money. But what I think all of us want to see are people held accountable and people go to jail for these crimes.
You've also recently discussed a bill called the Duplication Scoring Act. This would ultimately prevent overlapping government programs, which there are many, which are ultimately also ripe for fraud. How significant is this problem, and what would this legislation target and fix?
This is a significant problem. You're going to see more and more instances of massive amounts of Medicaid fraud in all 50 states. My legislation was something that we've crafted that we feel is common sense, that will help identify fraud either quicker and prevent payments from going out. That's what you got to do. When you find fraud, you've got to cut off the payments right then. That's what President Trump done, and you see what the Democrats do. They cry foul, and they get all their welfare recipients jacked up, saying, oh, the Republicans are going to cut off your electricity, your food, your free health care, and your public transportation and everything else. We want to provide welfare to people who are entitled to receive welfare, people who are truly disabled, children, low-income women who are pregnant, elderly people in nursing homes. That's who Medicaid's supposed to be for. But what you're seeing is a massive expansion of Medicaid, not just the number of people enrolled in Medicaid, but services provided by Medicaid. So all this federal money is rolling into the states, and they're just signing checks and not even, verifying that people who are on Medicaid are truly eligible for Medicaid. Maybe you were eligible for Medicaid 3 years ago, and after 3 years, you lost your eligibility, but you're still receiving Medicaid in some states. That's what my legislation is going to address, and hopefully get a control on the massive amount of fraud that we're losing in these government welfare programs.
Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, really appreciate you joining.
Thank you.